So today I spent much of the early morning hours studying for today's quiz in Spanish regarding leccion 16 or 16, which was essentially a quiz on two tenses. The future tense, which has the same energy as saying a conjugation of ear, then and then another verb in its infinitive form. But the future tense is for the more distant future. I believe decire los means I will tell them. And then there's the tense of the past subjunctive. And a lot of verbs are seemingly irregular in that tense because you take the ustedes eos form, preterite form, remove the ron from it, and then you attach these endings. There was also, I studied those tenses through their associated VHL Central Interactive Grammar Tutorials. I rewatched them so that I could take these notes. Which in turn were used for me to study. This slip of paper, this receipt actually, is me studying what at the time was my complete list of the irregular past subjunctive verbs. I think this one is to smell, to leave, to feel, to give, to tell, to be, to do or to make, to go, to be able to put, to want, to know, to have, to drive, to prefer, to repeat, to sleep, to believe, to destroy, to hear, to work, to lose, to open, to live. And then for that one, I'm not entirely sure. And then I made the decision that it would be a good idea to study the vocab for that chapter, the jobs of the world. Initially, it felt like a struggle. But as I went on, I felt better and better about it. Eventually feeling some kind of incredible energy. Though also in the early morning hours I had 2 Mountain Dew Rise energy drinks. I believe one that was blue and then a green one. Ultimately separated by maybe an hour or 2. And I drank those energy drinks relatively slowly as I studied. But I also believe it had something to do with listening to the albums of Everywhere at the End of Time, by which point, by the time I got to studying the vocab on Quizlet, flashcards, Quizlet Learn, I was on stage 3, which I feel the tracks in stage 3 sound pretty incredible. And I actually got to stage 4 right before the double hockey sticks, sirens, by the time I left for the quiz. In between finishing up the vocab, finishing studying it, and today's Spanish class, I went and got breakfast. I got a pretty large breakfast. I saw Chef Cody, someone I know from the Best of Best Chefs competitions, and perhaps maybe also various wows in the past. And then I saw someone else I know from Brockway. Brockway's the only place that serves these breakfasts. I don't currently have any of the Mountain Dew Rise energy drinks, at least I don't think so, so I only really have this one. Which may be as healthy as the Mountain Dew Rise energy drinks. I mean, this one's calorie free, but that could mean it has an artificial sweetener. Which is pretty questionable. And it may depend on what exact sweetener you use, how healthy it is. I hear some of them can be pretty bad. At the breakfast place, I also encountered someone who remembered me from an earlier meeting. So when I met with earlier in the semester, who turns out to be a graduate student about to graduate again. And that same person who got me set up with the paperwork for my reserved night desk attendant job. Though oddly enough, I've not been able to get a single shift because I've not been able to be fast enough when it comes to that. I went back from breakfast, did a bit more studying for my Spanish quiz because sometimes you can't help thinking that a bit more studying will allow you to do better. Excuse me. On the quiz, but I didn't study that much and primarily worked on the 99th Dan Hamming while going into stage 4. By working on building up that scene where one of the medical workers talks with Dan Hamming. I believe we were given roughly 20 minutes for the Spanish quiz at the end of class. The rest of that class was spent on doing some exercises. Yeah, that is me technically doing a bit of studying during the class. Basically, I transferred these onto here. I brought the 2 pencils. That's the only 2 pencils, seemingly, that seem capable of writing more than a few lines, essentially without starting to suddenly run up on empty, even though they've got plenty of ink in them. I wrote such goofy sentences in the conditional because I must have missed the proper directions of the exercise, and so I initially wrote some goofy sentences. If I were you, I would not break my glasses again. If I were you, I would not sell my car for gas money. If I were you, I would not go 3 days without sleep. If I were you, I would not steal a horse. If I were you, I would not wear a barrel on my head. If I were you, I would not eat a rat. If I were you, I would not burn my drink. If I were you, I would not travel to Japan by train. But I was able to create a proper sentence for the exercise within my head. essentially, if I were you, it's kind of hard to remember the exact sentence I came up with. Yeah, but it did have something to do with relating to helping with Maria, with Manila, with the job search. Technically, these sentences also help, but it's obvious you shouldn't do these sort of things if you want to find a job. I think the general rule for this game is that you expand your guest settlement by 1 square, at least, for each new guest race. The current quest I'm on requires that I unlock the crystal manufactory upgrades, but I can always do that a bit later. I essentially told my Spanish professor what I just told you regarding the goofy sentences after I was done with the Spanish quiz, which was corto, or short, and only consisted of dos, or 2 components. And the first component had to do with the future tense, and the other component on the other side of the page had to do with the past subjunctive. Though oddly enough, while the first component was straightforward, the second component seemed to be more cryptic to me. At some point I had went out on a walk after I completed that studying for the vocab at around 6:10. Another walk to the Hartwell building. Sat on a bench for 5 minutes enjoying all the greenery and the beautiful architecture of the buildings that made up Hartwell. I felt a bit of nervousness because Hartwell Hall is very close to Laptrop Hall, which is essentially I believe that's essentially the police station here on Brockport campus. just a bit of fear that they might think within 5 minutes that I'm essentially loitering, sitting on a bench. Yeah, that was essentially the kind of fear. During my freshman year, I had a few interactions with the Brockport police, both on and off campus, because during my freshman year, I went out a lot. These were pleasant interactions. Oddly enough, these interactions include the time I accidentally got lost after going to Crony's Pizza. Apparently, the police were looking for me, but they didn't find me until I was back on campus again, walking through the Union building. Which probably isn't that far into campus. I don't recall seeing even a single police car until that particular moment. But anyway, after I was done with the Spanish quiz, I immediately headed off for the Daily building for my in-person meeting with that same person I had booked that appointment with, essentially at Brockway, in which we talked about me making a resume for this internship with the Monroe County Democratic Committee that I want to do. And I believe I also at least briefly talked about grad school. I said it was briefly. After this in-person meeting on the second floor of Daly Hall, though I needed some help before I ultimately found the room for the appointment, 113, I initially walked up and found myself in the Global Career Services Center, which is the wrong one. I believe it's the Global Education Center. I was supposed to be at the Career Services section, so I essentially followed the arrows there, and then once the meeting was over, I followed the arrows out, though oddly enough, it all led to some kind of small little door that when I opened led me to the stairs to go down and then into the exit. I guess the top floor of Daly Hall would otherwise be rather confusing. The second floor of Daly Hall. After that, I decided to go to Brockway for lunch because it was raining. It had technically started raining around 10 in the morning, maybe 9 in the morning. I went on a second walk to get the breakfast at Brockway, but the raining deterred me from a third walk, and it's also what caused me to go to Brockway again, where I encountered Junior, who we chatted together at Brockway as we got our lunches. Excuse me. Him getting Sobe Life Water is what ultimately drove me to get Sobe Life Water too, along with the combination of the sheer nostalgia of it, because I remember getting that all the time back when I was a freshman. Now all I've got to do is do the week 12 assignment for my African politics class, which will be due tomorrow at 6 p.m. We talked together as we walked back until our paths separated. Junior to Cooper Hall, which isn't actually a residence hall. I believe that's just an area where the ROTC is, along with some other departments. And me off to Eagle Hall. I stayed up until technically 3:30 p.m., set an alarm for 5:30 p.m., as my dad suggested. It either didn't go off or I didn't even perceive it. Either way, I slept through it. Woke up at about 9 p.m., by which it was too late for my dad to want to go out and pick me up here at Brockport. Excuse me. Right before I ended up falling asleep at around 3:30 p.m., I watched some Spanish language learning videos that were made, using Beyond. Though these, I think I'm technically above the level for those kind of Spanish learning videos. They did things like say the different emotions in Spanish, the different kinds of weather in Spanish, the different colors in Spanish, and the different shapes in Spanish. That sort of thing. Basically, individual words in Spanish. Admittedly, I may know less than 1,000 words in Spanish, but I think I'm beyond that point, if maybe just slightly, on that scale of Spanish comprehension. I also did some more cleaning up in my dorm room and found these Sharpie markers. How wet these Sharpie markers are, I still have yet to discover, though I could easily find out. The plans for that piece of styrofoam is to do a female African. Considering I've already done plenty of male African styrofoams, and I found that bag to put them in, but I only wanted to put them in when it was guaranteed that Dad was coming. Since I'm actually getting pretty close to the end of the semester, I got an email from the RD which prompted me to go down to see if the RD was within their office. Excuse me, he was. I knocked on the door and we ended up having a bit of a conversation. This was around 9 in the morning, if I'm recalling correctly. So I believe the raining started with a dribble, just a little sprinkle, at around 10. And then essentially by 10:45, it was raining harder. And it rained that harder amount when I went to get my lunch at Brockway. Also, so far, what this has given me hasn't been that valuable to me. But it's better than nothing.